You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Hi, Mike. Hi, Geoff.
Hey, Kate.
Good morning.
Good to see you. President Donald Trump is now in office, and while he may have his own territorial ambitions at Hotel Pacifico, we can also think beyond our borders. I think this is a first for us, right? No, this is not. No, this is not. This is maybe our second foray beyond our borders. First one into the Yukon, because we are casting our eyes and your ears, even your sour toes, up north to the Yukon. We are inextricably linked. Our economies, our courts, First Nations relationships, our shared history of gold rushes, and in the future, maybe even our electricity infrastructure. Today, we are honored to welcome Yukon Premier Ranj Pillai. He was first elected as MLA in 2016. He became Minister of Energy, Mines, Resources, and Economic Development and has served as the Premier since 2023 when he assumed the leadership of the Liberal government midway through the government's second term from his predecessor. He's a Cape Bretoner who migrated west and north to the Yukon and is also the second Indo-Canadian to become a premier in Canada after our own Ujjal Dosanjh. He's here today to talk about the relationship between our two provinces, U.S.-Canada relations and his meeting with Trump Jr., and how territorial relationships with First Nations are changing, among other things.
Did you just upgrade the Yukon to a province, Kate? This is
territorial. Oh,
yeah.
Yes. Between our
thing,
province
right?
and our
It's
territory.
just a matter of time.
Oh God,
Yeah,
I wrote the intro. Yeah.
The 11th province.
There you go. Between our province, yes, between our province and and the territory. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Premier Pillai.
Hey, thank you for having me. Look, that's fair, Kate. There's lots of talks about what's a province, what's a territory, what's a state, what's a country right now. So that's a fair comment.
Does that happen? Am I like, you gonna make me feel better?
No. I think, listen, I've just been watching what's been happening with our friends across the border. They're redefining, what's a country and state and province anyway. So no, it happens sometimes, but no. Look, happy to be here and real pleasure to be able to spend some time with everybody.
All right, let's start because I think we are talking on the day 2 of the Trump administration, and we're all sort of talking pretty heavily about the possibility of tariffs. I'm curious, in particular, from your perspective. I mean, I know you did have sort of a meeting with Trump Jr., Donald Trump Jr. Tell us a little bit about what the strategy is for your territory in this relationship with the U.S.
Yeah, well, look, I'm focused on working with the other premiers in the federal government. I think we spent time together over the last week, and it was really important to get a strategy in place. And that's still, of course, going to be the focus. I think what you've heard from premiers is that we still think there's incredible value in reaching out to individuals that we may know and trying to focus on educating individuals within the sphere of influence of President Trump. So, I had met Don Jr. Earlier in 2024 and had an opportunity to reach out just before Christmas. So, of course, everything's been, moving very quickly from day to day. But, at that point in time, we had just had our Council of the Federation meeting with all the premiers. It was a really, significant morning, probably in Canadian history. I was sitting with 3 former ambassadors from Canada to the U.S., Gary Dewar, Dave McNaught, and Frank McKenna. They were briefing us. We were talking strategy. And during that period of time, Chrystia Freeland, in the middle of that brief up conversation, resigned.
Wow.
2 hours later, an hour and a half later, everybody went into a lunchroom. Premier Ford came into the room with Chrystia Freeland on speakerphone. Like, it's just, wild to think back at how that played out. And really, you then had a group of folks that were distracted. There was lots going on. We wanted to focus on the work of the day, but everybody probably had so much on their mind, and I just felt at that point it was important to do what you can in your role. And I reached out to see if there was an opportunity to meet, and the response from Don Jr. was, he was going to be in North Carolina on the weekend on some downtime with his son, and if I could make it to Raleigh, North Carolina in the next few days, there'd be an opportunity to spend a bit of time. So that was what took place. So sort of over a weekend, we interacted. There was a few folks there, but I was very clear. I said, look, we need to sit down and have a discussion about what's about to play out. It's great to see you. We can talk about things of shared interest like hunting and outdoors, but let's have a talk about the numbers. So this is clear, and the opportunity. It was a positive conversation. I wasn't talking about tariff threats. I was talking about the real numbers. And actually, if you pull, the exports coming out of Alberta out of the equation, the surplus swings to the United States. So there's a bunch of other countries. You've heard it from everybody, whether it's Mexico, Vietnam, China, the EU, where the US should be focusing, not us. We should be talking about opportunities.
You have a bit of a hook there with Don Jr. too, because then the Trump family actually were in the Yukon at some point, were they not?
Yeah, I think, look, for rough terms in business, like the first bankroll was made in the Yukon on the Yukon BC border, so it's BC2, and we have a great local company called Yukon Built, and I just made sure that I brought him some of their clothing to remind him that they wouldn't be where they were today if it wasn't for their opportunities that they first had during the gold rush in British Columbia and the Yukon, and from there, the company grew. And so this is deep, and it affects them personally. These relationships that we've had over the years, and again, focusing back, we're going to try to do those things. Whether it's governors, I have a great relationship with the governor of Alaska. We've done a lot of work together. You saw some of their the first day highlight the connection between the Trump administration and that governor. They have a very close relationship. So we're going to use all of us. All premiers are doing this. They're all reaching out. We're going to continue to reach out, especially now as we move towards February 1st.
Well, that connection through Yukon to Alaska is very critical to Alaska and to Yukon. Do you see any threat to that based on comments you've heard? I know Premier Eby talked about everything being on the table. Is that transportation corridor something that could come into play if things became very fraught?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's, again, like, we've looked at all of the strategies that could be deployed. And I think that's something, you've heard David will speak, what he thinks his team has pulled together. We have looked at, where we think we can apply pressure collectively with other leaders. But, that we've done some great work, which is with Alaska. We've been able to leverage tens of millions of dollars that wasn't available from the federal government of Canada to improve infrastructure in the Yukon. We did that by actually leveraging US money and with an endorsement from the governor of Alaska to improve that road, which is not just about, ensuring that our communities in that area have proper infrastructure, but it's about Arctic security. It's about sovereignty. All of us should know, even in British Columbia, the incredible role that the presence of the U.S. military plays in Alaska. So, there's a lot, we're putting everything on the table. I mean, look, I know we want to have an open conversation, but I think, as you all know from your previous work, we're keeping our cards pretty close to our chest. And the first wave of activity that may happen is very surgical. It's very focused on individuals that are close to Donald Trump and understanding with the intelligence that's been pulled together exactly what happens in their communities and constituency and how pressure could be applied. Hopefully that we don't have to, but that's the view from the Canadian team.
Is there any nuance in how, a particular discussion from Trump, or the sort of mention he made of making Canada the 51st state? I'm thinking of the fact that Whitehorse is so much closer to Anchorage, and having myself grown up in a Canadian town that had such stronger ties, really, and more proximity to a major U.S. capital than to a Canadian one. Does that add any nuance to how people react to that notion, and just broadly how they feel about how our leaders need to be reacting to Trump in this moment?
Yeah, look, I think there's been two different emotions that have been shared with me by Canadians and Canadian leaders. Some that have, smiled, disregarded the comments. Others that have taken a real offense to it. And you've heard other premiers talk about how they feel that was disrespectful comment. What I can share with you is that, before Christmas, sitting with folks that are close to the transition team, you know, people that are, really engaged in Republican politics, really they laughed about it. It was a trial balloon that went up. It was a comment, I think initially maybe off the cuff, trying to poke, do what he does. And then when it kind of gained some momentum, or people breathe air into it, which really happened domestically, you saw some Canadians say, what, I really would like this. And then of course it sort of gets some legs, and then it continues on. I think initially it was just, again, it was a poke, and there's been this strain in the relationship between leaders of both countries. I don't think there's any, secrets about that. And it was that's what it was. But we have to watch. We do have to watch where this all goes. I think we have to have our eyes wide open on the geopolitics that are at play.
So are Panama and Greenland like playing it cool, and like we're just drawing outsized attention because of our reaction?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Greenland. Well, Greenland's such a different scenario. Like the indigenous governance there. I mean, what I've got to learn, I sat down with leaders from that country in Anchorage this last year at the Arctic Encounters, and folks that I'm aware of, I'm not speaking for Greenland, want to see infrastructure investment into their community. They want to have the right quality of life and supports, and I think they're kind of it seems that they're open to playing ball with folks that care about Greenland and want to see investment. So you've seen sort of a different reaction, where here it's like, no, we're not for sale. This is our country, and how are we going to work together?
But we do have infrastructure troubles. And I want to relate that. Yeah, like I actually didn't know this about the Yukon not actually being connected to our electricity grid. Can you tell a little bit about what that means for you guys to be sort of siloed there, and I guess and how you where your energy comes from, where your electricity comes from?
Yeah, it's been a microgrid or an independent grid over the history of the Yukon. It's primarily we've had renewable sources of energy. It's usually over 90% or higher, whether it's hydro, new renewable, wind, solar, those types of things that are now coming online. But the difficulty becomes this: when you have the potential for larger industrial projects, one significant project can, maybe take 20% or 30% of what your output is. Your demand can fluctuate to that extent. And now, as we see this focus on critical minerals, we see in the Yukon, we're waiting to see, we have a First Nation government that is actually looking to have an ownership position. It'll be the first time you've got a First Nation community that owns a critical minerals mine. So, as we see these projects potentially come online, you have to move pretty quickly. And the capital expenditure for a new project is significant. We don't want to just rely on an LNG or a diesel solution. It's been harder to build hydro projects. That conversation here. So it really goes back to I'll just say it quickly. I mean, when I was in the Energy Mines Minister, I watched the NDP government coming into place, and here I listened to John Horgan very quickly, and there was this concern about, hey, we're gonna have all this extra energy. And what are we going to do? And this is the price to do it. And I was, deeply looking at the cost for us to produce, and there was a significant delta. And I thought, well, why are we not having a different discussion with British Columbia? That's changed. I mean, the demand in British Columbia has changed, but that's led to this concept of, long term, we all have this obligation to think about how we're going to build Canada, and how do we think out years from now. And, it'll probably be subsequent governments that get something finished, but it was time to have a discussion with British Columbia, with the Tahltan Nation, with our own First Nation governments to say, hey, is there an opportunity to link and give us the access to the North American market to buy electricity, which gives us that ability to scale up our what we require quickly if we have projects come online. So that's something we're looking at right now.
Your proposal is basically to connect to BC's grid coming from the Yukon down to, I think, where it's called Bob Quinn Lake, which is south of Dease Lake, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and it'll be depending on the work that gets done by BC Hydro. Like, they're doing a lot of investment right now. of where the link point is. But yeah, that's the
So
concept.
through the northwest corner,
Mhm.
through Tahltan territory, and that's a long distance. So obviously, there's a lot of complexity to that proposal. I
Mhm.
guess you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
But you know, that's your solution for bringing kind of more energy security to the Yukon. Do you see over time that you'd be able to push power back to BC through that line? Like, do you have potential power resources up there that can add supply to the line, or do you see yourself more as an importer?
But we look at it both ways. I think, it's importer to start. That
Mhm.
makes sense. I definitely don't have complete visibility to the thinking in British Columbia as you talk to small modular. But we do have First Nation governments in the Yukon that are part of working groups to look at as technology comes online, as it is commercialized, as the opportunities exist, to look at that type of
So small
technology.
modular nuclear.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
I think my understanding has always been that hasn't always British Columbia hasn't been open to that. There may be even policy in place that
Mhm.
would restrict that. So you look at it, southeastern Yukon, where first some of the First Nations want to talk about that. That gives you also the opportunity to be on the Yukon side of the border, and in the future being able to have assets such as that and be able to sell back in. But I want to share one quick thing as well that a lot of Canadians don't know and people in British Columbia may not know. We did not have redundancy in our communication network across Canada's north. Um, we're one of the only circumpolar countries that did not, different in Russia, different in Nordic countries. So when a line goes down, everything stops. Telehealth, banking, commerce. And this was happening across 3 territories. So we're not shy of executing complex projects. So we just built over the last 3 years through the pandemic a 777-kilometer fiber line. It went over 1,100 water crossings, and we had to directionally drill under the Mackenzie Delta, and it's been completed. A little bit over budget, but not much because of trying to build in the middle of a pandemic. But it's about the same length, not the same capital cost of a transmission line, but we knew we had to take this on, and we did it, financed it with federal government and built it, and First Nation governments executed a tremendous amount of the work. So there's a baseline to have those conversations about transmission, and I think we hope that whoever is leading this country wants to build nation building projects.
What would you say to British Columbians who ask, well, why should we worry about Yukon? Why is that of a concern to us? I mean, I've been privileged to visit there a few times and I could maybe make up an answer, but what's your message to British Columbians about why the relationship with the Yukon is so critical?
Yeah, we're probably so linked, and you're right. Lots of people here in British Columbia wouldn't know. I mean, I'm in British Columbia right now. I'm here for the Roundup conference, the AME mining conference. So many companies that are doing work in the Yukon. This is their home base in Vancouver. All of our significant care in the health sector when we do have complex situations with our patients, they come to Vancouver. Whether their service, they get their health services here or one of the other major centers, and that's an agreement we have with the BC government. When you think about some of our great companies like our airline company, Air North, which continues to expand, contributes greatly to YVR, and we're back and forth all the time. There's significant First Nation relationships between Northern British Columbia and the Yukon, where the borders we've built, of course, those relationships, and of course, those communities predate those lines that are drawn. So there's a lot of commerce that happens. There's a lot of connectivity. A lot of our students choose to go to university at UVic or UBC. And we like to think that, I mean, most people in Atlin, British Columbia would say that they're really in the Yukon. And we made sure years ago we gave John Horgan a great T-shirt that said Atlin, Yukon, that he loved. So we've tried to be able to deliver services to over time. I think that's key. And there's just a bunch of significant opportunity between the province and territories to continue to work together and build out the economies of both British Columbia and the Yukon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think WAC Bennett put out a map once that had BC going all the way to the Arctic. So you think we should maybe join forces? What do you think?
No, I think we do. We have joined forces, and I think there's been, a tremendous amount of work that we've tried to do together. I mean, we always try to ensure that there's a great relationship between our governments, no matter what. In the current context, I've really tried to work with David Eby. I know that my predecessor, Premier Silver, had a really close relationship with John Horgan, and those are things that we always try to do. But as well, I mean, when we talk about the North and the Arctic, there's another thing that we should share with folks in British Columbia, and try to share that with across the West. When things get built in the North, and you think about investment in defense, inevitably either certain expertise and services or the procurement of goods is happening in British Columbia. It's being driven through northern British Columbia. It might be acquired in Vancouver. It's acquired in Alberta. So there's just such a connection between and such a ancillary benefits to British Columbia at all times. So going back to that key piece that Geoff said, like why should they care? On the energy piece, we're aware we want to bring something to the table. The commitment I made on that conversation was we'll leverage the money, and then all of the studies and work that we do that can benefit British Columbia that have to do with BC, we'll pay for it and we'll hand it over to you. We know there's always a tough conversation about expenditures with any energy company and rate. So that was the key. So it was really, hey, you'll get a benefit. Just support us in being able to leverage the money, which is what happened and what we've been able to do.
So you mentioned nation building earlier, and so for a project of that magnitude, I'm assuming that you look for the federal government to jump in and support a project like that as well, because the benefits may not be in the moment for British Columbia to do that. The numbers may be too big for the Yukon. It sounds like it would need a push from a national level to look kind of big picture what that does for national infrastructure down the road.
Yeah, exactly. We've never asked British Columbia to come to the table to pay for that level of project. I think British Columbia is really, my sense is that there's a lot of leadership with the Tahltan Nation in northern British Columbia right now. There's a lot of opportunity that's being seized. Those communities are building out really significant projects in the mining sector. So I think probably British Columbia and nations in that area will come up with ideas on how they can bring infrastructure farther north. That's going to happen anyway. We're here. I think it's Tahltan night tonight. It's probably the most well-attended event, or one of the most well-attended events other than Yukon night at Roundup. So that will happen. What we have to do is tap in and be able to pay for it. But again, we have to be in a position where federal governments understand how to get projects built. And you're kind of hearing that from the Poilievre camp. I think I'm hoping to hear that from the people that are vying for the current prime minister's seat. It's not just about building these big infrastructure funds and then trying to get you to borrow a bunch of money, even if the rates are good. Inevitably, for us with small populations, we can't carry that debt maintenance. It's about understanding that building things now are going to have incredible benefits, not just for the regions, but for the entire country. That's how the country was built. And, we have to get back to that, like you see in other regions of the world.
So when you're making that pitch to the feds and you're talking about the sort of the projects that need to be linked into the grid in order to get off the ground, what are sort of the most eminent opportunities on the big project side?
Yeah, we've got 27 to 34 critical minerals, either significant deposits or you can find occurrences. We have arguably what is considered the biggest copper project almost globally. The Department of Defense in the US and the Canadian government have just funded a tungsten project, which has enough tungsten to supply the United States for 50 years, one project. And that's, only about 8% of that gets used for defense, and the rest is for technology needs. So there's probably anywhere from $3 to $6 billion in projects that, those capital costs would probably even be higher now if you'll think about the investments just based on the inflation to build projects. So there's a number of projects, some First Nation governments are now leading some of those projects as well. But I think we also have to think about defense. Like we, we just did this. We just spent years collectively as a country, decarbonizing, making sure there's more renewables. But now we have a $73 billion defense plan, which focuses on the North. And so how do you fuel that? Is it going to be small modular? Is it going to be grid connectivity? Those are all important things to contemplate. I mean, north of the Yukon, near the Beaufort Sea, we're seeing Canada build an F-35 base. What are your sources to power that? And so, I think all three premiers in the North will build a compelling argument for what they need. And it's going to be around some of these key pieces. We're lucky, you can drive from the Beaufort Sea through Vancouver and then go to Miami. A lot of people don't know that. I mean, we've got incredible, road networks that really, of all of Northern Canada, you can drive from the Arctic right to any other place in Canada through Whitehorse and an international airport, and goes on and on and on. So it's probably the best spot that we believe to be able to build out that infrastructure and connect to the North American grid.
And what's you've got all these potential mining projects that are huge. What's required to get them up and running? I mean, obviously money, but are there barriers there that are preventing these mines from going forward at this point? Is it a combination of things?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. I mean, some are happening right now. I mean, I think we'll probably see announceables in the first or the last quarter of the fiscal or the first quarter of the calendar year on some projects where I think, Selkirk First Nation is really this exciting project with BC-backed supporters to build a copper mine or have a copper mine reopened. It's a stressed asset. So I think we'll see projects like that come online. We've had some challenges over the last year with a gold mine that really had a significant failure. So we're managing that at this particular time, which has taken a lot of dollars. Another place for all of us to reflect on how things should be done right in the sector. And there's other projects going through regulatory processes. We hear it a lot. It's always, I think in British Columbia, you'll hear it as well. We're kind of in the same place as BC. British Columbia has a legally mandated timeline to come up with new regulation. We have an obligation. It's not legally mandated per se, but we have a contract that was made with Yukon First Nation governments decades ago. And we have, the highest concentration of modern treaty nations in the country. And the commitment or the grand bargain always was that based on those negotiations, you would build legislation around resources together. So it's different than anywhere else in the country. It's not a deep consultation. It's co-holding a pen to do this work. And we're in the midst right now, just finishing the framework of the foundation towards our mining legislation. So First Nation governments for a long period of time, again, I'm going to reflect on what I've learned, not speak on behalf, have always said, look, that was the commitment. So we have to have a modernized framework that respects, the values of those communities and nations. And that's not easy work for anybody that's been in politics. I mean, you're creating a new regime, and there's always fear, there's concern, but inevitably you want to get to clarity, consistency, and stability in your processes. So when it goes through some of the mining legislation, we're doing that now. And our environmental assessment process is tripartite between First Nations, federal government, and us. It's a one-stop shop, but there's so much happening right now. They're overwhelmed, and we need Canada who funds and oversees that to be in a position to actually make sure they have the tools and the capacity to execute the assessments, because we just have so much happening. We've had arguably the strongest economy in the country for 8 years. We've had the lowest unemployment in the country for now. It's gone up and down, but like over the average for 8 years. I mean, this has been, we had a 9.5% GDP growth in the middle of a pandemic. It's been busy through exploration, mining projects, tourism, real estate investment, all of these things playing out over the last number of years.
And strong population growth too. How analogous is that growth to what's happening elsewhere in the country, like the proportion of immigrants and sort of do you have the kind of lag in infrastructure behind that too, that everyone else is struggling with?
Yeah, there was components of Canada, or I would say areas in Canada, like if you think about like the peninsula of Halifax, probably over a 5 year period grew faster. But at one point, yeah, we led on percentage growth. Of course, the quantum small compared to other jurisdictions, but we led growth over a 5 year period, I think up until 2021, 2022. Yeah, I think, it was led by immigration. It was led by growth in the economy. It was led by, the federal government's position and posture when it came to immigration in the country. So we're going to see that slow, and it does put pressure. Okay, yeah, like it put pressures on your healthcare system. It puts pressure on your education system and your housing, and whether people wanted to accept that as reality or not, or what the position was coming from Canada, from the federal government. That's the reality. So we've been building affordable housing again at a record pace, but it's tough to keep up. And then it becomes a much more complex delivery of education in a public school system when there's children in that school with multiple primary languages, and trying to integrate them into your system and support them properly so they get a great education. And on health, in the Yukon was a place where at any of our hospitals for a long period of time, if you walk into a merge, there's people were used to having 5 people ahead of them or whatever it may be. You're always having a challenge getting family doctors and things such as that. But of course, that puts more pressure on the system, and those are all really significant investments that you have to do. As you know, in British Columbia, I mean, you think about the cost of the new hospitals that are being built just in Vancouver, like very significant, and that with that pressure of population, definitely. So I think we'll see a slow, and that's going to cause its own challenges in our economy and with areas of our business sectors that have really relied on that workforce. We have the highest percentage of population in the country that are part of the workforce. So not only the lowest unemployment, but there's a lot. The people of the Yukon are working in that. There's not a lot of extra folks to draw from. So we really relied on programs, but I think we've just got our new numbers handed out across the country, and there's a reduction, significant, like 50% reduction is what we're seeing in our immigration programs right now.
Premier, your Liberal government is nearing the end of your second term. I understand you've got a fixed election date coming up this fall. And your size of your legislature is growing, mushrooming to 21 seats. Is that right?
Yeah.
So are you getting ready for re-election? You're going to stand again as premier?
Yeah, we're doing two things. We're, of course, you're in the process of recruiting new candidates, and you're in the position of trying to really look for us, the whole government, because we're so tight. It's razor thin.
You have a minority for our listeners. They may not be aware you've got a minority government, so that sounds familiar to people in British Columbia.
Yeah, probably as razor thin is what's happening here. There's always close things that happen. So focused on the spring, we have a confidence and supply agreement. There's a number of things in that agreement that still have to be fulfilled. We've done pretty good at making sure. So I take that incredible focus on making sure the commitment that was made in the agreement with the opposition gets fulfilled. And we move that through to the spring. So you're also recruiting candidates, building a proper budget, that reflects what you need to have in place. And you can, I guess that my, spoiler alert will be, try not to get into election budget mode, which can kind of lead to lots of expenditures, but actually, hold the line and make sure you're, looking after the public purse as you go into the fall. But, by all intents and purposes, there, lots of folks, I guess, are watching to see if we would pull an election in the springtime. We're going to see other provinces do that. But we do have a set election date for the fall. For the fall.
And all right. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. I think the case for the intertwined nature of our province and your territory are clear.
Yeah.
And it was really nice talking to you, especially this moment in time. Thank you,
Yeah,
Premier
thank you.
Pillai. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, many of us who check in around here are in the business of, or just deeply care about, bringing attention to issues that deserve more attention. And one of those issues is copper theft. I say this because the threat of copper theft is more than financial. Copper theft can disrupt communities, interrupt education and business operations, and create the need for expensive repairs and infrastructure replacement. And it also poses a threat to public safety. When telecommunications infrastructure is compromised, entire communities can be cut off from emergency services. Copper theft can leave people without internet or cell phone services or access to 911. That's a pretty serious concern. Thieves target copper wiring components from utility poles, substations, and construction sites for resale. And here's the thing, copper theft is on the rise. I'm not talking about a slight uptick or a steady climb. Theft or vandalism of telecom sites has increased by more than 400% since last year, with copper theft accounting for the majority of those instances. It's something governments and industry need to come together on because telecom infrastructure is vital for public safety and economic stability. TELUS is working to ensure resilient, high-quality telecom services are always there to protect British Columbians and actively working on opportunities to collaborate with all levels of government to keep us all safe from the threat of copper theft.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Today, we're going to go over, we'll take the pulse on day 2 of the Trump administration. We'll throw back to what went down at the BC Natural Resources Forum, and we'll check in on what Premier Eby is saying will go down through the mandate letters that came out last week and went out to all his cabinet ministers. And we'll try and save a little time at the end to talk about all those fat cat mares, we'll call them. Sound good?
There's a one-word answer on what will go down.
Okay.
Spending.
Well said, sir. All right.
Priority number one.
Okay.
Not tariffs.
Not tariffs. Well, okay. I mean,
sorry, Kate, moving right along.
No. We got to stay on the tariffs for a bit because I think, I don't know, my bet would have been the three of us would be joining today and talking all about tariffs because they would have already gone down. And I don't want to make too much of the fact that we're day 2 and they haven't yet. But I don't know, is this anyone starting to say that Danielle Smith's charm offensive worked? Or what are we thinking of the fact that we haven't seen those yet from the Trump administration?
Well, I'm sure that Ambassador Kevin O'Leary has managed to defend Canada's economic interests. So that's very comforting. What is it, February 1st now? They say that it might be tariffs. Look, this is the talk about Trump trying to, bluff his way, and maybe more than a bluff, but he's certainly got Canada's attention from a negotiating stance. He appears to have this cooperation of many Canadian interests to say, how do we appease him? And I look at it on the provincial perspective. You have David Eby basically saying, look, this is going to potentially cost, trillions and zillions of dollars to the Canadian economy, and we'll fight it with our germanium and other things. and John Rustad saying, no, we need to secure the border. That's how we'll keep them happy, right? Well, if we're not securing our border. So two different approaches from Mr. Rustad and Mr. Eby on whatever is to come next.
Yeah, but I thought that John Rustad's reply to the disclosures made by Eby and Brenda Bailey about the cost of the theoretical cost of that's a huge range of tariffs was confusing because he really tried to blame Eby for causing the trade war. And I'm pretty sure that Eby may be guilty of a number of things in Rustad's mind, but it's pretty hard to say he's triggered this and his heated rhetoric has somehow been causing problems for BC. So in a funny way, Rustad was steering Eby to do sort of a Danielle Smith thing and head down and try to get into the inauguration or something and see if he couldn't swing a deal. And of course, Eby's not going to do that. Also, our former and very eloquent guest, Aisha Esty, who is the president of the Conservative Party, was down there and tweeting very vociferously that we are back and identifying herself and I think implicitly the party with Trump. So I don't know if this message will fly very well here in BC or whether polling has shown you anything, Mike, about how
Well,
British
was
Columbians feel
Aisha,
about that.
was she trolling you, Jeff? I mean, I saw an Instagram post or something come across where she said, "Make Canada great again," and then she says, "Oh, we'll see if I get canceled." So,
Well, she might
I
have been
mean,
trolling me, but I mean, various reputedly respected outlets said she was there.
yeah.
So and identified a Conservative Party functionary in the background. So who knows? I mean, if so, it was a strange tactic
What
anyway.
I find
Yeah.
interesting
Mhm.
is okay, I haven't seen a poll lately, but there are some Canadians who like Trump,
Mhm.
and it's a minority, and I'm just going to call it at 25 or 30%. Because I think it's not as high as as Trump supporters in the United States. It's less than that. Canadians tend to lean Democrat when they look at the American side of things.
I thought I'd seen numbers a lot lower than that. I thought it was more like 15, but go ahead.
Yeah, whatever it is, 15, 20,
Yeah.
25, 30. It's a minority. Anyways, it's lower than what, say, BC Conservative support is in BC, and it's lower than federal Conservative support.
Right.
So I'm interested to see if either the NDP or the federal Liberals try to use that as a wedge,
Yeah.
and try to divide conservative voters based on, look at these conservative types are very happy about what's happening with Donald Trump, and geez, how's that good for Canada,
Mhm.
or whether people can separate out the two. I mean, you either fight, and some voters will be like they want to fight Trump, and they're angry and they're mad, and they want to defend Canada by fighting, and there's other voters who are like, we need to be pragmatic and not create a problem, and they might like the fact of Poilievre becoming prime minister because then maybe he can get along with Trump and you know
Yeah.
and mitigate the damages. So there's a lot of different approaches, different thinking, different.
It's really interesting that, yeah, exactly. It's the diversity of approaches. And we're sort of seeing like provincially, there's some conservatives who, in particular, who I think have felt really comfortable kind of leaning into a more Trump friendly line on this issue. Doug Ford being the strong exception. And then federally, I think Polyev seems really uncomfortable with it and seems to be trying to find maybe a line that doesn't exist to walk on this issue. It might be some of how this plays out differently regionally, right? And the electoral map and the path to victory at a federal level. But I don't know if you're seeing some of those differences too and have any insight into why it's so different for John Rustad versus Pierre Poilievre.
My own view is that I would declare myself a Doug Ford conservative on this front because there's two or three conservative positions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that for Pierre Poilievre, my assumption is he does not want to break with Danielle Smith, and she's made it pretty hard for people to. She's drawn a very strong line between herself and the rest of the Canadian
Yeah.
political leadership on this front. For Rustad, I think he's got an easier line to hew. I'm not going to give him any suggestions. Where I think David Eby may be cruising into some difficulties is that Brenda Bailey's been speculated that maybe they would jettison one of the key election planks, which was the provision of a $1,000 per family average income tax cut, which was discounted into the deficit during the election. In other words, Eby clung to his majority in spite of promising to increase the deficit by a significant amount to pay for that. The Eby messaging and the Brenda Bailey messaging up to now has been more about we'll pick these targets as if somehow British Columbia is going to find some kind of sweet spot to shoot a little bullet into that's going to bring the American behemoth to its knees. That's not going to happen. I think the fight back is going to be part of that national effort. What I think voters would like to hear in BC is that the government's very strategic about how it will protect their jobs, make sure their industries are not brought to their knees, minimize disruption, mitigate price increases, or whatever the other at-home in my pocketbook concerns are. And there's probably a view in Victoria that to some extent for the Eby administration, this is what COVID was for the Horgan administration, but there's some big differences. What I would say, though, is I think that to the degree the Horgan team, which I was on, was successful. It was very much a focus on keeping people safe at home, being safe, being kind, being calm. It was a very on the ground thing. If the EB team figures they can deal with this by picking retaliatory targets and acting as if they're in charge of the fight against Trump, I'm not sure it'll be that successful.
All right. Well, we'll keep watching this one, and I think we'll
I
have to
did
come
I
back
did
to
check
yeah.
Twitter here, and Aisha's tweet, "Make Canada Great Again." 66,000 impressions, so she's getting a bit of traction on that. So she she definitely does project an unapologetic strain of conservative thinking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Exactly.
Hashtag was we are so back.
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, we'll have to have her back to explain it.
There's
That'd be
there's
good.
some swagger there we're not seeing at the federal level or from her
It's
her.
not Ken Sim swagger either. It's a
No,
different kind of
no.
swagger.
Yeah. And Ken Sim swagger is pretty distinct. But let's come back to swagger too. I'm curious, Mike. I do want to talk to you a bit about the BC Natural Resources Forum and how that went there. I'm hearing EB actually brought one of his was maybe more charming, brought some charm that time, and was maybe more well received,
Well,
maybe
it was a
helped by
charm
some.
offensive, that's
Okay.
for sure. Compared to 2 years ago when he was rather stiff and perhaps not relatable to the resource sector. Last year he warmed up a little bit, but this year was, I would say, a significant difference. I think the near-death experience of October 19th had a lot to do with it. You can feel a pivot happening on the resource sector generally with the NDP government, notwithstanding, arguably some strong perspectives inside caucus and cabinet that maybe are not seen as necessarily resource champions. It seems like the government writ large, at least EB, wants to move in that direction. And so his speech, was laden with celebratory mentions of resource projects, particularly critical minerals and their objectives there, but also a shout out to the Nishka LNG project, which caught my attention. It's all there. We'll get to it in a few minutes on the mandate letters too. But I think the tone was important. He was only in there for a quick sprint because he had to head to the premier's meetings that were happening the next day. But I think he made his impact there, and I think he was surrounded by a phalanx of staff from the premier's office as well. So they were covering the landscape there. He also used a line that he used at the BC Chamber of Commerce in December, which goes along the lines of, "I want you to know that I know how important all this is." So in other words, it's like, "Hey, look, I get it. I get it."
It's like
It's
I
like, yeah,
see you.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
So that's him kind of, if he had reading glasses on, it would be, like,
yeah.
"I want you to know that I know." So,
Well,
you know,
prosperity. You have to have prosperity before you can have social services. That's very much the new emphasis, I think. The
is that the
economy.
new policy of the NDP?
It sounds
Okay.
it.
All right.
Seems like
Sounds
we're hearing
good.
it more and more.
Okay.
Well, we'll come back to that relates to mandate letters. But I want to ask, I'm curious, did permitting come up a lot, Mike? Did he talk about
Well,
how, yeah.
Minister Brar in the minister's breakfast, which was interesting. The minister's breakfast is six ministers all in their comfy little chairs on stage, which you see at these types of events. And Mr. Brar's crack was, he wants to bring in drive-through permitting. So that got a chuckle out of the crowd. And if the NDP government gets to drive-through permitting, they really have come a long way. But the whole thing was like, we've got to work on permitting. And the premier said it a lot too. But what was noteworthy about the minister's breakfast, it was Adrian Dix. And he had been up there early on Tuesday. He was there until the Thursday. He was everywhere. And he was kind of outranked the other five ministers on stage. Well, literally he does, but like as opposed to sitting in his chair and having his little nappy time comments that you do on these types of panels, he stood up and gave a rousing, as a on based on Adrian, I guess, rousing for Adrian standards.
We were grading on a bell curve now
Call
for
to
him.
action of the urgency that is required, and it was quite forceful, and he was making it very clear that the Trump tariffs create a new context from which government has to, even if the tariff threat doesn't turn out to be as bad as we fear it will be, that we have to learn from the need to diversify and export our resources to different markets. And I felt like he was leading us somewhere, like he's setting up for a bit of a pivot on energy. So, but generally, I thought the BC Natural Resources Forum was kind of the Adrian Dix show. Like he was Hydro had a big thing that they did there. He spoke at that. He spoke at other events that were there. He was very present in the trade show floor, very engaging with
It wasn't
stakeholders.
like, didn't they?
I hadn't seen that from him before.
Well, he came on the heels, of course. We talked about this earlier, of his approval without EA process of 9 wind farms.
Yeah.
But as I recall, too, the Premier and Adrian, of course, agreed there should be a Northwest Transmission Line, which has been a project waiting to come to fruition for a long, long time. Again, it would have a lot of Indigenous equity. It's necessary for these critical mineral projects to proceed because they're not on the grid at this point. And I think the decision by the Premier to say that all of the energy permitting would now be done by suddenly the name escapes me, but our energy regulatory agency was a big streamlining. We're not quite clear.
ER.
Yeah, BC Energy Regulator.
Regulator.
So that was a big shift because that will speed things up. What I thought was interesting, and I don't know what to make of it, is that in the discussion of projects that the Premier's excited about, there was no mention of Phase 2 of LNG Canada, which is fully permitted and has long been reputed to close to final investment decision. If it went ahead, it would be on the existing pipeline alignment, so there wouldn't be any further dislocation on that front, and it would be about a $16 billion private sector investment. So it'd be very interesting to see where that goes, and it's also not accidental in my mind, but I don't know what to read into it that it wasn't mentioned in his list of good news to come.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So on Adrian, so a little bit more on Adrian Dix.
Yeah.
So it was the Adrian Dix show up there.
Is he the new Glenn Clark? Yeah.
Well, I did happen to have a conversation with him about Hotel Pacifico. So stay tuned on that.
Great.
Stay tuned on that. I think, although Adrian did quibble with our BC book show that we had with Keith Baldry over a year ago, Geoff. So
wow,
apparently he covered the landscape appropriately. So
I think he may have been right on. He may have pointed out a gap there. We can fill that later, though.
Okay.
We'll have to get out our curriculum list, whatever they call that.
All right. I'm glad to revisit that discussion. So let's move then to the mandate letters. And I think we can pick up a bit about this message, Geoff, you were talking about, like sort of this notion that we put prosperity in front of the spending. Did you see that reflect? Like, are you thinking of Brenda Bailey's prosperity in front of the spending? Did you see that in Brenda Bailey's mandate letter?
Well, every letter, all the letters had 4 bullets that were for everybody, and then they all had some other bullets, some of which were for everybody and some were specific. But the 4 sort of government-wide ones lead off with an economic agenda, economic prosperity, and so on. And the subtext is very much that we need prosperity, we need to grow the economy if we want to have the revenues to protect all the services. Then the secondary but strong message is we're going to protect services. And Bailey was given guardrails, I guess is the term these days, for how to, these were missing, by the way, in the previous budgets under the EB team, but how we propose to get the budget to balance. So she's been told to show how that will happen, but not given a deadline to do it. And she's been told to keep the province's debt to GDP ratio in the top group. So those are pretty broad brush objectives. I'm not quite sure how doable they are. And everybody agreed during the campaign that the next deficit will be higher than the last deficit by a good shot. So I think there's a big sea change occurring inside the EB administration to focus on getting the fiscal house in order, looking for savings in every single ministry, hoping to grow the economy in certain ways while protecting services. So it was a big change, and I think we're talking about the mandate letters more than we would have if they'd been issued at the regular time, which was the day that the cabinet was appointed normally. These are quite a bit later than normal, partly because the Premier wanted to incorporate any changes as a result of the Green Agreement, but the Green Agreement is just mentioned in passing. It's not something that has produced any policy changes that I could detect.
So the wording in the finance letter was put BC in a clear path to balanced budgets, which is new. I mean, compared to where we were a year ago, anyways. And they kind of strayed from that. So at least that's my perception. So now it's like, okay, what does a clear path look like? Well, I guess we'll see in the budget in March. But that's, bending that down is going to be challenging, especially
It's heavy
in light of
lifting.
potential trade actions that can impact the economy. And, I guess that also gets into, well, I guess may take precedence over delivering on the election rebate, the $1,000 rebate that they're now signaling that probably won't happen.
Well, I go back and forth on that. I mean, she said that's on the table. Premier Eby said that's on the table. My first reaction was, really, can it be on the table? I mean, I worked in the Glenn Clark administration where flip-flopping and budget changes of that sort, they played very, very negatively for the Clark team. Is this going to be treated as a flip-flop or fiscal probity? I'm not sure.
But isn't this the kind of thing where you put it out there that you could kill it and then you do something less than that? You make it more measured, more restricted in terms of its application, right? Yeah. That's always a way to lessen the blow of that type of move.
It feels like they really don't want to go through with it because they've got big problems.
They don't want to go through with it as promised, but I think, again, it was always kind of antithetical, just not in their playbook to put it across income brackets like that. I think it would be, you could narrow it much more.
Definitely.
The question, I think, for voters
on them if they do it.
The unpredictable piece here for me, I think, is whether or not voters say, that's a good idea. You should change your mind because there's new facts in front of you, which is how it was presented by Bailey. Now we've got this Trump threat. Or do they say, look, I would prefer you balance, but I think you made a promise and you should deliver on the promise. There's a character dimension to the change, and then there's sort of it would be very interesting to see how this plays out, because there was a Rustad rebate during the campaign. Don't ask me to explain it, but it was going to be very, very expensive. It was supposed to help home affordability. This was the reply of the EB team. And it was going to be a permanent tax reduction on income tax into the future. So something to keep an eye on.
I think it's a tricky one because it looked like a desperate promise, and it was, and now, the emperor.
So do you plead guilty?
Yeah.
Pick your poison.
I don't know. I mean, another way to look at it too is, I think, because this is coming in the wake of these Trump tariffs, like, it is the kind of thing, and we're at the beginning of a 4-year mandate. Like, I think this is the kind of thing you could tweak and get away with and not get completely trounced. But we'll see. Should we talk about health? Jody Osborne's mandate letter, improving access to primary care, continue to connecting more people to healthcare providers, addressing the emergency room closures. Anything in there that was surprising or is going to be particularly challenging? Geoff?
I think,
Mike?
Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
Well, there's nothing surprising, but it's a backbreaking load. And it includes something that was tilted at in the campaign, which is a review of health authorities. And it includes mental health and addiction, which was not a big ministry before, but part of that advocacy, policy work, and so forth was done by mental health and addiction. Now that's all back in and reasonable people can disagree about whether or not that ministry should ever existed, but it's not there anymore. And I would say the whole addiction crisis, opioid crisis, has been muted a bit by being included there, because ahead of it, of course, is stuff that has more voter salience, like ERs and things like that. It's a monumental job for Josie Osborne. And the critical factors, I think, for her to think about are, well, what would be the biggest change on the ground? Would it be saying that there will be no ER closures, or not more than 2 ER closures per quarter in any, I don't know. But some benchmark where people can say, well, no, actually it was worse before and it's better now, is very important for her on a couple of those fronts.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's,
Before we leave, this one more money thing, if I can.
Yeah.
Just realized, I'm always carping on about labor relations, and March 31st, all of the collective agreements expire. So I just saw yesterday that Paul Finch, president of the BC Government Employees Union, who's been a supporter of David Eby, by the way, personally and politically, I think, for some time, has said he expects this to be a very, very difficult round of bargaining. And it was very difficult last time. There's lots of reasons why it would be difficult this time. It could be more difficult than even Paul Finch would like it to be, because many collective agreements right now are being taken back to the members and being turned down. So this is a bit of a cloud on the horizon for the EB team in the midst of tariffs and all the other difficulties they've got, because what the Finch leadership are looking at is why there's, in their mind, too many managers in the public service. And so they're hoping for some outcome that reduces the number of managers. There's been a significant increase in the number of FTEs, but just want to plant that flag that this is a potential migraine for Brenda Bailey as she works out how she wants to manage the budget in the coming year.
Coming as early as March, yeah.
Well, and just going back to health for a second with Josie Osborne, like the mandate letter is pretty broad, like take necessary steps to keep ERs open and make sure everyone's got a family doctor. And by the way, we got to be on a path to balance the budget. So, and then new minister, haven't hired a new deputy yet. That's asking a lot. And I don't know what tricks they have up their sleeve to reinvent healthcare in the next 12 months, but they're going to need to do that in order to meet all these imperatives.
Can I ask, because I think just coming back to the kind of fiscal guardrail piece, I think we've sort of positioned it in contrast to the last EB budget or the previous EB budgets. But I think, are these firm fiscal guardrails in the sense that they've anchored it to kind of relative debt to GDP ratios with other provinces? Like I don't know, is it fair to call these firm budget guardrails?
Well, what are guardrails? The guardrails.
It's a pandemic
guardrail
term.
Would be an example of a guardrail could be like with these labor deals that Jeff's talking about, is to have wage settlements that are at or below the rate of growth in the economy. And so that, you can slow the rate of spending below the rate of economic growth, and then you will start making progress on reducing the deficit. But until they do some structural things like that, it'll be hard to control the size of the deficit. They'll have to get lucky with extra resource revenues that may emerge if one of the commodities get hot, or there's macroeconomic trends that help drive corporate taxation revenue and employment growth. But otherwise, it's just the heavy lifting of tightening your belt and slowing spending, and that's not fun stuff sometimes.
I don't think they're guardrails. It's more like a firm budget.
Especially when healthcare is 50% of the budget.
Yeah. No, I'm not sort of characterizing that they should be firmer or anything else. I'm just saying, like, I don't know. Like, I looked at that and kind of went.
I think that they're a pandemic creation, so that governments that knew they couldn't reasonably forecast what expenditures would be in the face of the pandemic would say, our long-term values mean we're going to try to do this, that, and the other thing. Whereas in the past, not that for long ago, you just sort of said, we want to balance the budget
by X point of time. Yeah.
Yeah. And if we're not able to, we'll explain why.
Yeah.
It's I have a lot of sympathy for Brenda Bailey, because most of the things that would be foreseeable are not foreseeable this year, because of we just don't know what the Trump tariffs will be if they arrive and what the impact would be on the ground. And if there is a flood of people who are undocumented from the United States to Canada, that could, say, in the Lower Mainland, increase the number of people who are homeless or who are unhoused refugees from, some hundreds probably to thousands and thousands. And that's been a problem in Ontario already between Olivia Child, the Mayor of Toronto, and Doug Ford. So many intangibles could come from the Trump activities beyond the tariffs, and we're just not sure what they are.
I'm going to move us along then. I do want to get to Jordan Armstrong's been doing some great work at Global on mayor's salaries. And I'm going to start with Mike, because Jeff, I know you're a vein that as soon as we tap, it's just like the flow is going to be unstoppable. So
I'll try to restrain myself.
Okay, sir. But I'm going to start with Mike. And Mike, I want to put to you, like, one of my reactions to this was actually, this might be too coming from a province with the Sunshine List, and it's so public and so regular. But I was bothered just as much by the opacity of this, by the fact that it took a reporter pulling together the mayor's salaries plus the bonuses they get for participating in the different boards to paste this together, as I was by the actual salaries. Disagree? Agree?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, for our listeners, if listeners don't know what we're talking about,
Mm.
Global came out last week, and I think Canadian Taxpayers Federation was driving it, a list of some of the mayors and what they make when you add up the mayor's salary, their work on the regional district board. Maybe they have a role on a body like the Mayor's Council. Maybe they're on some other committees where they get stipends, like the Municipal Finance Authority, et cetera, et cetera. And for a mayor like Malcolm Brody, that could add up to, I think it was over $330,000 a year. And there are other mayors mentioned, George Harvey, Brad West, Mike Hurley, and others that I think people will be surprised that they're north of 300.
And much more than the premier.
Yeah, and I will make a distinction that the premier, yes, the premier, he's over 200 and something, I think.
220.
And there's no pension plan for mayors, so MLAs do benefit from an MLA pension plan, which is fairly generous by, private sector comparisons. However, I think the fact that it's not that transparent on the mayor's pay, and I think it comes at a bad time for the municipal leaders because there's a lot of scrutiny on projects like the wastewater projects that have cost overruns and things. And I would just say generally, my sense as someone who spent most of my time worrying about provincial politics is that I feel there's a lot of scrutiny on provincial politics, and how much we pay politicians and how much we pay deputy ministers. And that is because of question period, and it's because there's a press gallery. And when somebody has something negative to say, they often have a chance to air it, and then government has to defend themselves. And it's hard to defend pay increases for politicians at the best of times.
It's impossible.
It's impossible. But there's not that type of scrutiny until like last week on local government.
Yeah.
And I'd also extend that to CAO pay at municipal level too. Is I think CAO pay is it's either BC deputy ministers are a bargain or CAOs are paid too much. But CAOs tend to make more, even of a medium-sized community, make more than a BC deputy minister does, who arguably has a lot bigger responsibilities. So there's something, something out of whack between local government and provincial.
Well, part of the problem, there's two or three things I would just say quickly, and then I'll make a snarky comment at the end.
Okay.
The vast majority of people who are elected to civic office do virtually full-time work for very low pay. I'm talking $30,000, $50,000 a year. And they go to a lot of meetings, they do casework, and sure, there's lazy ones among them and so on. I don't think this was a breakthrough investigative piece of a Watergate level. Most of this stuff is lying around in public view, but I fully agree that it should be all accumulated and put in a list. And then you can see what everybody's getting. There's a huge pressure in the broader municipal public sector to recruit people because all of these salaries and the salaries offered to CAOs are invariably put through some lens by a management consulting firm to say, well, what should you offer and so on. And in a very demanding market, it's very difficult for good talent to be recruited by municipalities. So they're in a marketplace. They want to recruit somebody good. They're running some pretty big projects. They're going to pay some serious money. And the public is often unaware of what that's like. But I'll just take a comparison here, and it's a mean one, so I apologize in advance to Brad West, because I look at Malcolm Brody, a 20-year veteran of civic politics in the Lower Mainland, very, very widely regarded, has chaired every committee, senior committees, municipal finance, TransLink, and so on. He's got a city of several 100,000 with a lot of economic activity. It's booming. So that's Malcolm Brody, $331,000. It's a big number. Doesn't strike me as completely off the charts. And then Brad West, a very talented man, had $342,000 recently come on the scene. I think his career as mayor anyway is 6 or 7 years. Maybe it's been 10 in the larger scene. And he's in POCO with a very different set of challenges. And his number is big because he's got a pretty good base salary as mayor, and he's adding in TransLink and some other responsibilities. He was given by his peers, by the way. The big winner was Mike Hurley at almost $400,000. I won't bother getting that. But the question for me between, say, Richmond and POCO is, why do we have POCO? The question that needs to be answered here is, and this is not a knock on Brad West, but we have a lot of municipalities. And I think that if executive compensation gets to $300,000 for a place like Richmond,
Yes.
probably there's an argument for that. But POCO is not Richmond, and Anmore is not POCO. Not that anybody in Anmore is making that kind of money. And these are all problems within our municipal structure, which I will keep harping on. There needs to be some new thinking done on that. But as Mike says, if you want to put your hand up and say, I need a raise over here, I'm a councillor in Vancouver, whatever, get ready to be defeated at the next election. So there is that downward pressure.
If you're talking, I am all with you
case.
on strategic amalgamation. So if
Okay.
that's what you're saying, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, I think it's time for that conversation.
But
So
I do want to say for mayors that, especially in rural BC, it's basically a volunteer job.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
like our former guest, Denise O'Connor from Lytton, is paid peanuts,
Yes.
like less than peanuts. And it's a full-time job to rebuild our community. So I don't want anyone to think we're saying everyone's in the same boat here. We've got a few examples here in Metro Vancouver that seem to stack up a lot. But and I also say, to be fair to all those mayors we've mentioned, like they have developers walking through their door every day getting paid a lot more than they do, and they have to go toe to toe with these developers on what they want to bring to their community, negotiate with them, and all that stuff. So it's not to diminish the role of mayor either. It's just the challenge is looking at everything relatively, and we know what the provincial people get paid, and you look at the local, and they think like, do we got this right? So I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I was going to save this too for the mini bar, because actually I was going to raise my glass to amalgamation, because since I got here, have been baffled by
Not in the mini bar yet, Kate.
I know. Well, I'll have there plenty. Lucky for me, there's tons going on, and I can go there. But I just this kind of was the straw on the camel's back for me on this issue. And I have to say, you just look at it concretely. You just look at the size of Vancouver relative to the municipalities around us, and there's no analog. Like, in fact, it's, sort of, I don't know, Toronto to the GTA accounts for almost 50% of the population. I think Calgary, relative to the greater Calgary area, is like, I don't know, 2/3 of it, 80% even. It's huge. Same thing, Montreal. It's just so unusual. We're like 20% Vancouver of the greater Vancouver area. And then what happens in practice is we create these bodies to sort of oversee the infrastructure pieces and the other kind of decision-making elements that are supposed to sort of keep us running, because let's face it, we can't do it in isolation given the size of the greater Vancouver area. And it's like, you can make some case for me about why it's working, but I just have to say at the outset, it worsens the problem of how we can keep eyes on them, because not only are there not enough reporters and eyes at the municipal level, but then you've created for an analogous population a whole bunch of city halls you need to watch, and there's nobody there to cover it. And then you've created the other problem of all this decision making gets spread, and maybe you can make the case that diffusion, that decentralization of decision making is somehow advantageous. I'd be open to having that conversation, but then I'd say, first, you need to explain to me what's going on with our transit system and TransLink and the giant funding hole that has everyone pointing at each other going, who's on first? Or the wastewater sewage plant in North Vancouver that has a giant that is over budget and over time, and then everyone saying who's paying disproportionately. And then I'll just add, as the cherry on top, the fact that despite all science and all the advice of dentists, we don't have fluoride in the water, and it makes no sense. So I struggle. Again, I remain, despite my histrionics, open to being convinced, but I struggle to see how this decision-making body has helped us, and why it's not time for some amalgamation.
This body or process? Yeah. Okay.
You done?
Did you have a nap? Come on.
That was like a force field kind of coming through the computer.
It's been like 5 years building. I'm sorry.
I have nothing to add.
Sorry, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments
Rant
on that.
noted.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that it? I'm sorry. Can I just add one more piece that it really bugs me, because again, I agree. These are really hardworking people. Who actually could be worth something like this. But again, the fact that, because I think some of what's misleading about it is you see the salary of these mayors and you don't see sort of how generously they're paid for sitting on these other bodies. And random example, George Harvey phoning in from Hawaii to attend a meeting to be paid $500. It's the opacity. So I don't know, maybe I'll come back to this in the mini bar because I'm not done.
Tapping into your journalistic roots.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay.
So
All
we
right.
so we've got a new podcast in our family, right?
Yes,
In our
let's
air quotes family that we should just plug here for our listeners. It's called The Race to Replace. It's hosted by former Hotel Pacifico guest Dan Arnold, who's a pollster colleague of mine, actually. And they're breaking down the Liberal leadership race for the next, whatever it is, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, however long it goes. So yeah, check it out. It's kind of a companion to the Hurly Burly, Curse of Politics, and Hotel Pacifico. So I've listened to the first episode. I thought it was pretty entertaining. So gets into the granularity of what goes on in the leadership process for those who are interested. So, anyways, just FYI.
yeah. Good
Okay.
group of hosts on that one. Do you want to talk about that? There's some BC connections to this, and we can start, Mike, with Christie's decision not to run. Can you break us down? I know you were close to her on this, like
Yeah,
what the
and I
decision
was
was. Yeah.
definitely she's a very good friend of mine, so I had lots of chats with her about it. But I think the tough thing for Westerners in particular is that if you live in your life in Western Canada and not in federal politics, um, it's tough to keep up with French. And I mean, some people do,
Mm,
but in Christie's case, she hadn't kept up with her French. She had I think, a working ability back when she was younger. But so getting shaken off the rust, she worked hard on it, but it's not there yet for her in French, and that was a big drawback from her entering the race when the chips were down. And considering a French language debate and how fast a general election would be on the heels of a leadership process, it was pretty daunting. But I think the other thing for her was just standing up a nationwide organization in a short period of time on a truncated leadership process where the membership cutoff was only like a week, 2 weeks away. Pretty hard to do when there's established candidates that have been working at it for a while. And Mark Carney's, British BC or British Columbian Braden Cayley is running Mark Carney's campaign, and prior to the campaign, Braden was running Canada 2020, a think tank that Mark Carney
mhm.
was the chair of. So I kind of feel like that working relationship's been there for a while, and I think it was all heading towards this moment. And and you can see it. You can tell with the support he's trotted out in the earlier phases. So it's Mark Carney and Christopher Freeland and a few others.
Can I
You
just,
know,
Could 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 Christie have come back from the interview about the lifelong with the Catherine Cullen interview? Is that your view?
oh, I wasn't too concerned about that personally. I think the fact that she supported Jean Charest to stop Polyev was actually, I think, not unhelpful to her, but
mhm.
she tripped over some of the details, and that was problematic. But that's the type of thing that eventually you can power through once you get in your groove and move forward. But the other two factors I mentioned, I think, were much more impactful.
Can I just give a shout out, just speaking of the air quotes family, I think for any listeners who are more followers of BC politics who are curious about the importance of bilingualism in a federal election, our colleagues at Curse of Politics had a really good chat about this, I think, last week. And I think it might be something that feels a bit of a head scratcher if you haven't been around. It's particularly politics out east in Ontario and Quebec. So check that out if you're looking for a bit more of a bit more of a conversation around that.
Yeah, just as
Um,
a thought experiment, you can see how far you would get if you said, I'm a very strong candidate from Quebec, but I don't speak English.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and sort of, and there's some other kind of pockets I think within Ontario and um,
And I don't think
Newfoundland. Yeah.
Quebecers expect an English Canadian, especially from the West, to have perfect French. But
No.
I think it's certain needs to be serviceable. And
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to participate in a debate. Like that's, I think, the metric
yeah,
we apply, and
yeah,
that's not I graduated from French immersion, like
yeah.
it's yeah. Yeah, there's a very it means you have a very technical proficiency in the language as well as conversational.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Let's go grab a drink.
Hi, hotel guests. When I was a kid, I grew up in Maple Ridge, right on the border of Pitt Meadows, and we were surrounded by farmland. In fact, we had a small family barn, and I can still remember the chickens clucking. I could hear the coyotes in the distance, and I spent more than a few hours shoveling out stalls, although my sisters might argue that point. But have you ever thought about what goes into a farm, the hardworking farmers, the food it provides, the animals that live there? Or did you even consider that farms are helping to provide energy and address climate change? Over the past few weeks, we've been highlighting the solutions that exist in the energy transition. We've spoken about electricity, natural gas, the role of hybrid energy systems, but what about other low-carbon energy options like renewable natural gas? Renewable natural gas is a low-carbon energy that can help the province advance its climate action goals while providing an option for customers to help reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions. Derived from organic sources, renewable natural gas is a low-carbon direct substitute for conventional natural gas. FortisBC works with farms, landfills, wastewater treatment facilities, as well as local and Indigenous communities across the province and elsewhere to capture and purify this methane, which would otherwise escape into the atmosphere. Significant progress has been made in increasing the supply of low-carbon energy, which allows FortisBC to provide customers with the energy they need while using existing infrastructure and supporting overall emissions reductions. If you are a gas customer interested in renewable gas, visit fortisbc.com/RNG. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Okay, I'll lead off. I want to raise a glass to Adrienne Carr, who probably many days she would want to drown me in a puddle when we served on council together because we often disagreed. But Adrienne Carr is a unique figure in BC politics, and she announced last week that she's resigning midterm from her seat on Vancouver City Council, triggering a by-election. And I just wanted to reflect briefly on her career, which started in 1983 when she founded the Green Party of BC. She served a leadership role on a couple of occasions in that party. She became pretty prominent, I think, in 2001 when the NDP was reduced to 2 seats, and Premier Gordon Campbell spent some time consulting with her about the possibility of her playing some role, which never came to fruition. And then she moved to Vancouver city politics, where she was elected to council in 2011 and then topped the polls there ever since. So that is a probably unparalleled record of elected public service in this province. And you can say what you like about Adrienne Carr. She's a very gracious and committed person, and she never backed down from her view that politics should be done differently. She had struggled to find people to agree with her on a lot of occasions. She wanted it to be much more civil. She believed in and does believe in proportional representation, and I think must look back on her career with mixed emotions, because it's been quite a struggle for the Green Party to establish itself to the degree it has here now, with 2 council seats in Vancouver and 2 seats in the legislature. But if there's a Green Party at all, it's down to the hard work over many, many years of Adrienne Carr. So I just wanted to raise a glass to her as she looks forward to retirement.
You're here.
So there'll be a double by-election in Vancouver, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Be very interesting to see what happens there.
I heard that the Greens will run one candidate, one city will run one candidate.
Well, and that ABC, Mayor Sims' party will run 2, so he may want to try to sweep that. I don't know how that will work out. But
Team is going to run 2, I read.
Yeah.
As well, with Colleen Hardwick taking one of those. So that should
I
be
wonder
interesting.
Do you think Bill Tillman will come out of retirement and challenge
Bill
for that
Tillman? Is he
other
still
team
alive?
seat?
Is Bill Tillman still alive?
Hey, whoa.
Yes.
We're going to have him on the show now.
Oh, yeah.
Now look what you've done.
Oh, we're not going to have
Bill.
There's no way we're going to have Bill Tillman on this show. He is so overexposed. I tell you, he's on the.
Okay.
He's on.
Okay.
Which perfect segue to my mini bar.
I was going to say.
Because Bill is often on CKNW. He's on,
There's the segue.
every week he's on. God, sometimes 5 days a week. I can't keep track of that guy. I tell you. But all good, Bill. All good. Just teasing. But CKNW announced today that they're no longer going to be at 98 on the dial.
It's
They're going to be.
impossible.
They're changing to 73 or 730. So it's like I grew up.
What's a
listening to
dial, Mike?
CKNW 98, and it's going to be CKNW 73. Like, you kidding me? I can't possibly change my habits.
Sorry, but why? Why are they
It's
changing?
kind of an earthquake.
Stronger signal, apparently.
Mhm.
I view this must be some conspiracy of some sort, cooked up by the bean counters,
Of course.
whichever faceless corporate entity owns CKNW these days, the Global or whatever it is,
Smothering them with a
probably cooked up by the executive news producer at Global. I don't know, but
to smother them with a frequency pillow?
I don't know. What's going to happen to 98?
I don't
So
Good
know. I have
question.
so many questions.
maybe we should run Hotel Pacifico an endless loop on CKNW 98. That'd be a good idea. But anyways, it's like, this is a big change. It's just like changing my habits. It's like CKNW 73. It just doesn't seem right. So I'm taking a shot at this. I don't like it. I don't like change.
Mhm. Mhm.
So there you go. That's my shot.
I
Like
want to
moving
know
the
more.
legislature to Vancouver. It's a ridiculous idea.
It's such an essential part of a radio station brand. Like you can't do that lightly.
CKNW 73. No,
No,
doesn't work.
no. Okay.
All right.
All right. I'm just a dog with a bone this week, so I'll stay on our theme of the mayor discussion. I'll pivot a little and say I'm going to raise my glass to the Ontario Sunshine List. It is it makes the most sense. I'm sorry. And I know folks will quibble and say it's there but it's in different places. It's not consolidated. It's not comprehensive. The nice thing about the Sunshine List is it's everybody. It's the colleges, it's the universities, it's healthcare if you're on salary. It's all the public servants, it's the political staff, it's everybody in one spot. And we should update that puppy. Like 100,000 when it was started in 1996 was a different proposition than it is today. There's a lot of teachers on there now, but I think we need something like that here. So my glass is raised to Ontario's Sunshine List.
Yeah, and I think it should be for the private sector too, all the executive suite people.
Well, sorry, yes, and you reminded me of another point I wanted to make. Like a province who has led the way on transparency on salary bands and job postings should lead in this place too.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, thank you, sir. All right, I want to thank our guests today, Ranj Pillai. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.